Hey, peace. What's happening, everyone? On our deal with.
Like the rushing of a mighty wind. Like the rushing of a mighty wind.
So in part one of our Higher Ed and DEI and why they oppose FBA delineation, in part one of that video, we said that the reason they oppose FBA delineation and having subdivisions within OMB the way FBA desire them, we said they oppose them because it makes it more difficult for them to maintain their diversity programs. Immigrants come here through developmental pipelines and are more easily placed in higher ed and DEI programs. And in order to place FBA, it would be a lot more costly. And there would have to be a lot more work being done by these higher ed and DEI programs in order to make FBA be successful within those programs, because immigrants from Africa and Caribbean and the Caribbean is what it calls elite, especially those coming in from the Caribbean. It said they were elites because they have certain structures in place in their home country which prepares them for higher ed and positions in corporations. And so there's a lot to talk about with that. So I wanted to do a part two, and this is part two of that. So I started by asking ChatGPT, do immigrant families get developmental investment in their home countries before they arrive in America? Again, the idea is that when they get here, they are way more able to compete, and they are higher up the developmental ladder, if you will, and they just become an easier choice for these programs to fit their optics, as it called it. So again, do immigrant families get developmental investment in their home countries before they arrive in America? It says, excellent question. And yes, many immigrant families, especially African and Caribbean immigrants, receive developmental investment before they ever enter the U.S. mobility system. This is one of the most overlooked variables in debates about FBA versus immigrant outcomes, and it helps explain the elite funnel dynamics we talked about earlier. Let's break it down clearly and honestly. 1. Immigration selects for pre-developed human capital. Immigration to the U.S. is not random, it's filtered. Most Black immigrants to the U.S. come through one of the following channels: skilled worker visas, student visas, family reunification tied to skilled visas, nursing pipelines, international education programs, civil service pipelines. These filters tend to select for people who already have educational attainment, language skills, work experience, parental education, stable family structures, middle-class socialization. That is developmental investment, just not by America. 2. Home country institutions often provide the foundation. African and Caribbean sending countries frequently invest heavily in science or math education, civil service training, language mastery, English and French, technical vocational tracks, national exams, early competitive schooling. Example, Nigeria's WAEC exams plus unity schools. Ghana's boarding and mission schools. Jamaica's GSAT or GLE placement exams. Barbados's strong secondary system. Kenyan boarding schools and national exams. These systems may not have high GDP per capita, but they create elite educational cohorts. 3. Immigrant migration itself is a marker of elite status. Migration requires money, passports, time, networks, logistics, education, ambition, planning. Poor families rarely migrate internationally. Migration disproportionately selects strivers, risk takers, students, professionals, families who already invested cognitively or socially in their kids. That's pre-development. 4. Multilingualism functions as cognitive development. Many Caribbean and African immigrants arrive bilingual, trilingual, quadrilingual. This has effects on cognitive flexibility, academic performance, standardized test profiles, cultural confidence. These are non-trivial developmental assets. 5. Transnational families invest long before arrival. Transnational families often save for private tutoring, send kids to boarding schools, emphasize test taking, focus on STEM fields, prep for global competition. Caribbean nurses, African engineers, and civil servants commonly come from families that emphasize education is the ladder. That is an intergenerational investment strategy. 6. Contrast with FBA developmental conditions. FBA developmental environment is shaped by segregation, wealth depression, zip code disadvantage, school funding tied to property tax, redlining, predatory lending, policing, environmental racism, housing instability, mass incarceration. This suppresses developmental investment at scale. Crucially, America did invest in immigrant elites in their home countries by not burdening them with slavery plus Jim Crow plus redlining plus intentional underdevelopment. ChatGPT seems very liberal. Is it just me? ChatGPT has very liberal responses. But even though there was no, so ChatGPT is making it clear that there was no slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and intentional underdevelopment in the Caribbean. But I think, given there definitely was slavery. So I don't know why it would say it didn't burden them with slavery. It didn't burden them with Jim Crow and redlining and intentional underdevelopment. But the Caribbean and Africa were burdened with neocolonialism. And I'm trying to understand why, and that's one of the questions I'll ask later is why, Caribbeans and Africans were able to still have developmental investment, even though they had neocolonialism. But we'll get to that later. Number 7, U.S. immigration uses finished products. The U.S. doesn't develop these elites. It imports them after development is done. Universities love this because immigrant elites arrive already informed, already competitive, already middle class, already test primed, already ambitious. No costly development phase required. 8. Here's the key insight in one line. Immigrant success in the U.S. often reflects developmental investment made abroad, while FBA developmental deprivation reflects harm imposed at home. That's why comparing outcomes as if both groups were developed in the same context is statistically misleading. 9. Answer to your exact question. Do immigrant families get developmental investment in their home countries before they arrive in America? Yes, and immigration filters select precisely for those who received it. So I went on to ask the question I referred to earlier. I said, how come immigrant families are able to get developmental investment in their home countries despite neocolonialism, but FBA can't get developmental investment despite Jim Crow, etc.? And it said, this is a very sharp and mature question. because it forces us to look past surface identity politics and into the political economy, state formation, class structure, and education systems of different societies. The short answer is, immigrant origin elites were produced in systems that, despite colonial history, had functioning national education or meritocratic pipelines, while FBA lineage was intentionally underdeveloped by the US as part of its internal caste system. And I'll read that one more time because I think that's important. It says immigrant origin elites were produced in systems that despite colonial histories had functioning national education or meritocratic pipelines, while FBA lineage was intentionally underdeveloped by the US as part of its internal caste system. So let's break it down carefully because the nuance matters. The key structural asymmetry. Immigrant Black elites come from post-colonial nation states with national exams, civil service pipelines, public boarding schools, teaching corps, STEM investment, military academies, missionary or grammar schools, post-independent state building projects. These were not perfect, but they existed and had institutional continuity. FBA come from a population that was denied education under slavery, denied land during Reconstruction, repressed under Jim Crow, redlined under the New Deal, segregated under property tax schooling, excluded from the GI Bill wealth formation, mass incarcerated post-1970s, and deindustrialized post-1980s. This was not colonial neglect. It was intentional domestic caste management. It's intentional domestic caste management. Right? America has a caste system, according to ChatGPT. Number 2, colonialism versus Jim Crow were architected differently. People treat colonialism and Jim Crow as parallel, but they were not designed for the same purposes. Colonialism in Africa or the Caribbean was designed to extract resources plus build administrative subjects. So it needed literate elites to run bureaucracy, customs, postal systems, civil service, schools, trading houses. So colonial powers created grammar schools, missionary schools, civil service exams, teaching colleges, technical institutes. Colonial rule was brutal, but it unintentionally seeded elite development. Jim Crow, in contrast, was designed to suppress a caste within the same nation. So it could not permit a literate, mobile, upward FBA elite because elites can challenge caste hierarchy, demand rights, demand land, demand political power. So the US constructed anti-literacy laws, school segregation, poll taxes, lynching regimes, professional exclusions, housing apartheid, wealth suppression. Jim Crow was not underdevelopment, it was anti-development. 3. Colonial independence created nation-building elites. After independence in the 1940s to the 1970s, African and Caribbean states aggressively built talent pipelines, education ministries, scholarship programs, teacher training schools, STEM academies, exportable professionals, nurses, engineers, agronomists. This is how you get the classic African engineer or Caribbean nurse immigration pattern. FBA did not get an independence moment. The equivalent era, Reconstruction, was aborted violently. 4. Post-colonial states needed elites. The US needed a subordinate labor caste. This is the uncomfortable but correct economic answer. African or Caribbean states needed elites to run fragile new governments. The United States needed subordinated labor for industrial capitalism and segregated housing markets. Different historical needs meant different developmental strategies. And I don't know, I mean, is ChatGPT here saying that all people in the Caribbean were treated as elites and were put through these special programs, or was it a minority of them? Because I believe it was a minority of these people that were put through these programs, these elite programs, in order to run their newly independent countries. There were programs similar to Jim Crow that existed in the Caribbean as well. And the majority of the formerly enslaved population in the Caribbean suffered under that the oppression that colonialism provided. So it's as if ChatGPT wants us to believe that, all Caribbean people went through these special programs, right? And if not all of them, even if it was just a minority of them, that when America brought in people, it only brought in the elites. And I think that's the one that makes more sense to me. And I think that's the one it's actually presenting, is that it wasn't all of them. It was a minority of them, but that for the most part, immigration comes from those elites. America is very selective and only selects those people that were brought through those programs that have certain skills. But let's continue. Number 5, neocolonialism did not destroy educational pipelines. Many post-colonial countries suffered debt traps, trade dependency, IMF conditionality, foreign capital dominance. But the educational elite pipelines largely survived. Examples: Ghana, the Akomoda School, Nigeria, Queen's College and King's College, Kenya, Alliance High School, Jamaica, Wilmer Schools and Campion College, and Barbados, Harrison College. These schools are feeders for civil service, diaspora elites, international education migration. FBA had no institutional equivalents because freedmen schools were burned, defunded, or segregated into oblivion. I guess that speaks to what I said before. So it did mention the debt traps, the trade dependency, IMF conditionality, foreign capital dominance, which is caused the neo-colonial issues that Caribbean and African countries had to deal with. But it maintains that educational elite pipeline remained, and there was no such educational elite pipeline that existed for FBA, or they were destroyed. They were created and then destroyed. Number 6, the FBA experience was closer to internal apartheid and colonialism. Apartheid systems like South Africa and the US South do not produce large Black elites because elites threaten apartheid stability. But colonial systems often need a small native elite as intermediaries. Different incentives, different outcomes. They need a small native elite as intermediaries. But again, my question is, and this is another question we'll revisit later, does US immigration only come from that small native elite class? I mean, maybe 300 years ago, 200 years ago, maybe, but today, even in terms like with the ban that Trump just put on Jamaica, for example, I'm sure Trump doesn't think that the Jamaicans that were coming in were elites. So, but ChatGPT is making it appear as if that is the majority of immigrants that are coming in from the Caribbean. It's from that small native elite group and not from, the majority of the population. But I don't know if that's true. I really don't know if that's true. Those elites, I presume that elites and stuff like that would be coming in through work visas and student visas. But that's a small share of the immigrants that come here. Most immigrants are here on just regular immigrant visas. Not non-immigrant visas, the ones that Trump still allows. Because Trump still allows those non-immigrant visas. The ones where you're just here to work for a little bit, you're here to study for a little bit. Those he allows. And I can presume that, and I can see how the elites are coming through those channels. But for the most part, the immigrant visas are people that are here because they were filed for by their family members. And when that happens, you're not necessarily getting the elites. But let's continue. Number 7, immigration intensifies the selective elite effect. The U.S. does not import random Africans, random Jamaicans, random Haitians. It imports the already developed tip of the pyramid. So the comparison is African or Caribbean elite versus FBA general population, which is methodologically unfair. Yeah, so ChatGPT is sticking to its statement that America doesn't import random Jamaicans and random Haitians and random Africans. It's only getting the elite. But, I don't necessarily see my parents would not be considered among those elite. And most immigrants that come here tell you they came here with nothing. So I don't think most immigrants would consider themselves elite at the time that they got here. I don't necessarily know if that's something that I agree with at this point. But still, let's read some more. Number 8, the FBA developmental catastrophe. Aborted Reconstruction. The biggest historical counterfactual is, if Reconstruction had succeeded, FBA would have had the equivalent of a post-colonial nation-building elite. Instead, they got KKK terror, black codes, lynching, disenfranchisement, convict leasing, stolen land, forced migration. That was the anti-elite strategy. 9. So the answer to your question in one line: African or Caribbean immigrants arrive already developed because their states had incentives to develop elites. FBA were intentionally underdeveloped because the US had incentives to maintain a domestic caste. 10. The political punchline. When lineage subdivisions reveal this, it becomes clear that immigrant outcomes does not provide evidence against reparations. Immigrant elites is not proof that Black America failed. FBA deprivation does not equal cultural pathology. And the pipeline failure was structural, not personal. And that's exactly why institutions avoid lineage disaggregation. It destroys convenient narratives. I then said to ChatGPT, "You said colonialism needed literate elites. Then you said it unintentionally seeded elite development. Why isn't that a contradiction?" Yeah, I was just a little confused and I needed clarity because it was speaking about the fact that they intentionally created an elite pipeline, or that they created a whole structure of schools and programs to create an elite class that could run independent countries. And then one of the last things it said was that colonial rule was brutal, but it unintentionally seeded elite development. So I felt like there was a contradiction there, that it was saying it was seeding elites and then unintentionally seeding elites. So I just wanted to see if that could be cleared up. And it said, great catch. That's not a contradiction, but it is a subtle distinction between what colonialism intended versus what colonialism accidentally enabled in the long run. Here's the clean way to think about it. 1. Colonialism needed a functional elite, not an emancipatory elite. Colonial administrations needed a small number of locals who could read and write, do accounting and clerical work, translate languages, administer bureaucracy, manage trade and customs, teach in mission schools, and run postal and rail systems. That's a bureaucratic elite, not an empowerment elite. The colonial goal was administrative efficiency plus extraction, not social uplift and national independence. 2. The unintended part was the historical consequence. Once you create literacy, civil service training, exam culture, professional identity, national schools, scholarship programs, you have accidentally created the infrastructure for nationalism, independence leaders, post-colonial technocrats, diaspora elites, immigrant elites, educated middle classes. So the unintended part wasn't that colonizers wanted elites. They wanted manageable intermediaries. The unintended part was that those intermediaries later became independence activists, presidents and ministers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, international migrants. Colonial Britain never planned to produce Nkrumah, Kenyatta, Manley, Nyerere, Banda, Azikiwe. But its schooling system made them possible. So it's not a contradiction, it's sequencing. Colonial logic. Phase 1, build small administrative literate class. Phase 2, unintended, that class becomes nationalist elite. And phase 3, unexpected, that elite becomes global diaspora pipeline. Historical irony, not contradiction. Number 4, compared to Jim Crow in the US, Jim Crow's logic was fundamentally different. Jim Crow did not want literate black bureaucrats, empowered black teachers, skilled black technocrats. Jim Crow wanted domestic subordinate labor, not intermediaries. So it built anti-education structures, segregated school funding, occupational exclusions, political disenfranchisement, violence regimes. The goal was containment, not administration. Again, the colonial path is colonial schools, literate intermediaries, nationalist elites, post-colonial professionals, global diaspora immigrants. The FBA path was enslavement, Reconstruction rollback, Jim Crow, urban segregation, deindustrialization, and mass incarceration. One path produces exportable elites, the other produces an internal caste. And I've noticed that this is the second time that ChatGPT did not put slavery in the Caribbean and African paths, or under the colonial path. Like, it just skipped slavery. It starts with slavery for the FBA path, and this is the second time it's done that, where it's left slavery out of what happened in the Caribbean. It's as if it just ignores it, and it starts at colonial schools. Starts at colonial schools and literacy intermediaries, nationalist elites, post-colonial professionals to global diaspora immigrants. The FBA path starts with enslavement, then Reconstruction rollback. That's quite interesting and telling. And I wasn't 100% satisfied with the answer ChatGPT gave me in terms of the contradiction. I wasn't 100% confident or satisfied with that. So rest assured that I will be revisiting this conversation with ChatGPT, because I really want to see what other information it has to offer and what other contradictions I can try to spell out and get cleared up, because what I see as contradictions may be misunderstandings on my part. But regardless, if I think that that's what they are, I'm going to say so and then get them cleared up. But let's continue. Number 6, the key insight in one sentence. Colonialism developed elites for extraction. Nationalism repurposed them for empowerment. Jim Crow suppressed elites to preserve caste. The U.S. never had to build them later. So no contradiction, just a historical irony. So, just as a final summary for this video, this is part 2. We were just continuing the discussion about why DEI programs and higher education institutions, why they would object to FBA's requested subdivisions on OMB census forms. OMB right now has us under one big umbrella of just we're all Black or African American. FBA wants to delineate and have a section for FBA, a section for Caribbean Americans, a section for African immigrant Americans, and a section for Afro Latinos. They want DEI and higher ed programs to disaggregate them and deal with them separately. But DEI programs and higher ed programs and the OMB are all opposed to it because they prefer the big umbrella. And we were trying to figure out the reasons why specifically DEI and higher ed programs preferred the umbrella, the pan-Black umbrella. And we said those reasons are because of the pipelines that are created, or at least ChatGPT was making it clear that from its view, the DEI and higher ed programs have access to these pipelines of candidates that they don't have to develop, that come developed. When these immigrants get here, they are pre-developed because of what's going on in their home countries. So today we were just looking into that some more and just trying to figure out whether that's, how factual or just how much sense that makes. My issues with it is that, it seems to be making the point that since 1965 and on, America has just been picking from these elites. It concedes that it wasn't the majority of people in the Caribbean islands that were being pumped through those pipelines in their home countries. So, it was a minority of the people. They just needed enough people to be able to run the independent country, these colonial powers. So, my questions are going to be like, are those the only people that America were using as immigrants, were taken in as immigrants? Was America only choosing from those elite numbers? And so, those are the issues I have, because I don't necessarily believe that's true. I don't believe that every Jamaican that comes here comes from some elite class, or that every Asian person that comes here comes from an elite my understanding is, again, when most Asians come here, they say they came here with nothing but the shirt on their backs. And that's the immigrant story of America. So this whole thing about, colonial powers creating pipelines, which America took advantage of, I'm still not 100% sold on that. So I'm going to continue to, ask questions of ChatGPT to try and understand it a little bit more. But there are a lot of questions that I have, and a lot of things that I just want to make a lot more sense of. But that's it for today's video, man. That's it for this one. You done know. And in the meantime, if you liked the video, like the video. If you didn't like the video, like the video. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. And you done know. I'm gonna catch you on the next one. Peace.
I want you to listen very, very carefully.
It's all about life in the street. People are suffer, try survive in the heat. Bad mind them out to one hygiene a tweet. That's why enough are dead, rifle a beat. Everybody want big ups and want to drive in a Jeep. Every day I'm at the ball when she bike in a read. Not even 5 bills, we can't find for the week. Me no see no changes, the same cycle repeat. Give thanks cause life it's a sweet. But keep an eye open every time you go sleep. Cause mankind jealous and them idle go late. Them never yet plant and not try figure it. Bigger heads where you fight for the seed. Now care about the future nor the child where you creep. Them a pray the fat Kyle we submit. The system will slide where you fit.
Inna the streets where we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life.
Everybody a priest say them want it though. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life. This a real ghetto life. Yeah. Everybody just a pre-success. When me looking at the street, you me see enough stress. Them all a fight for who reach up next. Everybody want floss and a beat up chest. Juvenile in a them teen love sex. Them a breed the fast money, them no need subjects. And if you're unfortunate, please don't vex. Also the things said cause the streets don't rest.
Inna the streets where we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life.
Everybody a priest say them want it though. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life. This a real ghetto life. Yeah. It's all about life in the street. People are suffer, try survive in the heat. Bad mind them out to one hygiene a tweet. That's why enough are dead, rifle a beat. Everybody want big ups and want to drive in a Jeep. Every day I'm at the ball when she bike in a read. Not even 5 bills, we can't find for the week. Me no see no changes, the same cycle repeat. Give thanks cause life it's a sweet. But keep an eye open every time you go sleep. Cause mankind jealous and them idle go late. Them never yet plant and not try figure it. Bigger heads where you fight for the seed. Now care about the future nor the child where you creep. Them a pray the fat Kyle we submit. The system will slide where you fit.
Inna the streets where we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life.
Everybody a priest say them want it though. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life. This a real ghetto life. Yeah.